Welcome to the presentation titled Sequences of Social Security Program Development in the Developed and the Developing Areas, a Comparative Analysis. The problem that this presentation addresses is the geographical limit of the welfare state literature. The literature of the welfare state is fairly well developed. There are a number of theories and models that account for the emergence of and variations among the welfare states. These theories include the structural functionalist perspective, the culturalist perspective, the structural Marxist perspective, the new institutionalist perspective, the poor resource perspective, and the pluralist perspective. These theories are largely grounded to the developed world, and empirical studies around these theories are also confined largely to the developed nations. However, there are social security programs in the developing countries, and in recent years the number of social security programs in that part of the world is also increasing rapidly. However, there is lack of effort to systematically understand these social security programs in that part of the world, and we are yet to know whether the mainstream welfare state theories are relevant in the context of the developing nations, or whether we can generalize the propositions of the theories of the welfare state in the context of the developing nations. This presentation is a part of an effort to address this issue. The functionalist perspective is one of the most dominant approach that account for the welfare states in the developed world. This approach relates the emergence of the welfare state with industrialization and urbanization. It suggests that industrialization and urbanization involve and accompany some new social risks and problems such as displacement, industrial accident, issues of maternity, issues of aging, issues of unemployment, and issues of the breakdown of the traditional family structure. And the structural functionalist scholar suggests that welfare states emerges in responses to these new social problems. However, and this is known as the logic of industrialism. However, a nation's capacity to respond to the new social problems depends on their economic capacities. Only the affluent economic nations can introduce new social programs in response to the new social problems. And this is known as the logic of economic growth. Given that industrialization and urbanization involve similar social problems across nations, nations in general come up with similar solutions. And as a result, as the functionalist scholars suggest, social security programs evolve in uniform sequence across nations irrespective of their political orientations, political ideologies, and systems. This presentation primarily focuses on the third proposition of the functionalist perspective, and it investigates the sequence of and the order of social security program development in the developed as well as the developing nations. It does this in terms of the 5 pillars of social insurances, known as the program on industrial accidents, is sickness insurance, old age pensions, unemployment insurance, and family allowance. The year of introduction of these programs is used as the data, and the data is derived from the social security program throughout the world surveys of 2013, 2012, and 2011. A few efforts were made in the past to test this proposition. Flora and Albert tested this proposition in 1981 and found that programs on industrial injury tend to come first, and those on unemployment and family income tend to appear in the last, and programs on sickness and old age tend to appear in the middle. Conley and Sander also found similar results. However, Flora and Albert study was based on 12 nations in the developed world, and Conley and Sander study included 32 programs that were introduced before the First World War. There is no work done based on the most recent data covering both the developed and the developing nations. And this presentation is based on a study that included both the developed and the developing nations and covered 178 nations, which is 86% of the total nations of the contemporary world. Now, let us look at the state of social security program development in the contemporary world. We see that almost all nations of the present world have programs on industrial accident and old age, and about 50% of the nations of the present world have programs on unemployment and family allowance. In terms of the number of risks covered, we see about 1/3 of the nations have programs covering all 5 pillars of social insurance, and only 1% of the nations have only 2% of the nations have only one program, but there is no country in the present world without any social insurance provisions. Now, if we compare the state of social welfare program development in the developed and the developing countries, we see that almost all developed and the developing countries have programs on industrial accident and old age. However, while 3/4 of the developed countries have programs on unemployment, only 1/4 of the developing nations have programs on unemployment. While 3/4 of the developed countries have programs on family income maintenance, only half of the developing nations have programs on family income support. In terms of the number of risks covered, we see 2/3 of the developed nations have programs covering all 5 pillars of social insurance, while only 1/5 of the developing nations have programs covering all 5 pillars of social insurance. Now, if we compare the state of social program development in the developed world prior to the Second World War, we see that only 12% of the developed countries had all 5 pillars of social insurance prior to the Second World War. While at the present world, in the developing world, we have about 1/5 of the developing nations which have programs covering all 5 pillars of social insurance. This finding is very important in the sense that when the literature of the welfare state started to get its ground in the developed countries, the state of social security program development was even less advanced than the state of social security program that is present in the contemporary developing countries. These findings challenges any rationale to confine the study of welfare state in the developed countries. Now, let's look at the order of social security program development in both the developed and the developing countries. If we look at the developed world, in terms of the modal frequency of program development, we see programs on industrial accident have more frequently introduced as the first social security program in the developed world, and programs on unemployment and those on family income support have most frequently have evolved in the last as the 4th or the 5th social security provision respectively. Programs on sickness and old age generally appear in the middle, the second social security provision. We've also counted the ranked averages of social security programs in terms of their development. The program that has been introduced as the first social security provision in a country was given 1 point. The program that was introduced as the second social security provision in a country was given 2 points. The program that was introduced as a third social security provision was given 3 points. The program that was introduced as the 4th social security provision was given 4 points, and the program that was introduced as the 5th social security provision was given 5 points. That is, the program that has the least rank average score is likely to be the first social security provision to be introduced. And the program that has the highest or high rank averages tend to be the programs that are introduced in the last. So we see that in the context of the developed nations, the rank average for industrial accident is the minimum, is the least. It indicates that the programs on industrial accidents tend to be introduced first by the developed nations, and programs on unemployment and family insurance, family income support tend to appear in the last, and programs on sickness and old age tend to fall in the middle. Now, if we look at the program development in the developing countries, like in the developed countries, we see that programs on industrial accident have evolved most frequently as the first social security provision in the country. And programs on family insurance tend to most frequently have been introduced as the third social security program, and program on unemployment in most cases was introduced as the last or the fifth social security provision. Programs on sickness and old age tended to be introduced in the middle. In terms of the rank averages, we see that programs on industrial accidents had the minimum rank average, indicating that these programs are more likely to be introduced fast by the nations, and programs on unemployment insurance and programs on family income support have the higher rank averages, indicating that these programs are more likely to be introduced in the end, and programs on sickness and old age tended to be in the middle. So the general observations from the study are first, in both the developed and the developing world, programs on industrial injury tended to come first. In both areas, programs on unemployment and family income support tend to appear in the last. Programs on sickness and old age tend to be in the middle. In the developed world, programs on sickness tend to appear before those on old age and disability, unlike that in the developing world. On the other hand, in the developing world, programs on family income support tend to precede programs on unemployment. These results have important academic significance, as we have found that the state of social security program development is much advanced in the contemporary developing nations compared to that in the pre-war state, in the developed world, when the literature of the welfare state was developed. It indicates that it is time to expand the literature of the welfare state or the studies of welfare state to the developing countries. We have found similar results in both the developed and the developed countries. It indicates that the propositions and of the mainstream theories of the welfare state can be relevant in the context of the developing countries too. And this finding seriously challenges the existing practice of welfare state studies, which largely focuses on the developed world, and the studies are more likely to confined to the developed world. Thank you very much.